Buongiorno.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting on the Eurozone, on the state of the art of the single currency, and especially on the outlook for the future. We know that last night CEPS resigned, and so this topic is extremely up to date. We are aware of the problems that still strive, but we are deeply convinced that Europe has all the necessary cultural, political, economic and social resources in order to fix these problems and try to set up a much more sustainable future. But in order to do so, we need a much sort of more transparent dialogue, and we need to be clearer about differences. We need to call a spade a spade. We need to be able to talk openly about anything, and we do not have to oversimplify. And specifically, we need to dare to tackle problems. Otherwise, we will risk to feed extremisms and nationalisms. So we are there to talk about a critical situation, and we would like to support and favor, a specific approach to this problem. So this is a topic we need to deal with daily, and we all have to face a lot of problems, but we certainly need to get a common understanding of that. So we know what is at stake, and many people sort of put at stake the reforms. Some say that those reforms are not the solution. Some think that the austerity policy is simple like a poison preventing economic growth, or other things that the miracle solution. Other talks about cutting debts, but then Maastricht prevents countries from doing so. And what about Greece? Is Greek a single case, or is there really a contamination danger? Is there a danger of a domino effect? I mean, what is the extent of the problem? Some say that maybe the single currency came too early. Others say that we need to do everything at all costs. And maybe those that say that it came too early maybe are sort of somehow sort of supported by the fact that some countries did not participate in that immediately. But then others say that on the contrary, this is something extremely important. And you know that many countries in Eastern Europe see these issues differently from other Western countries in Europe, such as Italy, by the way. I'm extremely happy to be here and to have such honorable guests that have a great experience, who are real experts also for their European work. So I welcome Edmond Alphandéry and Hans-Werner Sinn and Domenico Lombardi. Welcome to Rimini, and thanks for coming. So I'll make a short introduction. Edmond Alphandéry is the president of the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, is also a member of the think tank Les Amis pour l'Europe, and he also works for several European multinationals. He studied in France and the US. He was also professor at Paris 2 Panthéon-Assas. And for many, many years, from 78 until 93, he was a member of parliament, of the French parliament. He was also a minister from 93 to 95 with Balladur government, and he was the minister for economy, and he promoted privatizations of major national companies, and he was one of the first people who signed a letter this year in June to the European institutions in Brussels to have a greater level of integration in bank terms, political terms, economic terms, so more integration at tax, bank, economic level. And moreover, he also asked for the sort of turn of the ESM into a sort of a European monetary fund, parallel to the International Monetary Fund. And then we have Mr. Sinn, president of the IFO Institute, one of the most well-known institutes at international level when it comes to economic research. Is also a professor at München since 1984. He also taught at the London School of Economics in Ontario, at Stanford, Princeton, Jerusalem, and Vienna, sorry. And he signed in 2012 a letter about the risks undertaken by the transfer union. So that is about the sharing of the debt among European countries, and certainly is going to talk about this. Is certainly one of the most well-known and mentioned sort of experts, not only in German-speaking countries, but also in the world. And then we have Domenico Lombardi, Director of the Global Economy Department at the Center for International Governance in Canada, and is also a president of Institute for Economic Policy and also a member of another major think tank. And also a consultant for Bretton Woods agreements, and is also a member of the G20 and G8 research groups for international affairs. Moreover, is a member of the Financial Times Economic Forum, and he also writes for the London Economics Journal. And first of all, we're going to have a first round of opinions, and so every speaker will make a statement trying to describe in general their vision and their sort of opinion about the current situation we're going through, and so which are, in their opinion, the sort of perspectives for the future of the Eurozone, of course, considering the problems that we are facing now. Then we're going to have a second round, and then I will ask them more specific questions about maybe topics that will be raised during the first round. So thanks for coming, and I give the floor to Mr. Edmond Alphandéry.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me, and I'm very glad to speak in this meeting for friendship amongst people. I have been asked to speak about the future of the Eurozone. Where are we? Where are we heading for? I think that the organizers have been well advised to put the Eurozone into the menu of this spiritual gathering. The Greek crisis makes headlines all over the world, all the more so with the resignation of Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras yesterday. And it is not due in the first place to the potential impact of a Grexit on the economy of the Eurozone. Greece represents less than 2% of its GDP, nor on the risk borne by potential turmoil on global financial markets, which even at the peak of the current crisis hardly budged. It is because everybody realizes, more or less consciously, that these events represent something important for the European construction itself and for the values it stands up for. Since the late 2000s, two successive crises hit the Eurozone. The first one was an economic and financial. The second one, which started with the arrival of Syriza to power in Greece in January of this year, has a political dimension in the first place. Let me explain this distinction. The euro crisis erupted because in the first decade of the euro, there had been a rise of current account imbalances between peripheral countries which, living beyond their means, accumulated what we call as economists current account deficits, whereas the countries of the core were posting surplus. When the global financial crisis hit the Eurozone, financial markets realized that this situation could not last. Sovereign debt of Greece, the weakest country, and later of other peripheral countries came under attack. The crisis was compounded by many other parameters on which I will not dwell. But in the end, policies implemented and also mechanisms that enter into play in a fixed exchange rate system led to, in peripheral countries, to a fall in wages, in prices, a fall of GDP, rise of unemployment, which ended up with a resumption of current account deficits, and of late, resumption of growth and decline of unemployment, albeit at a slow pace. Even in Greece, until recently, the economy had started to get better. In 2013, economic growth turned positive under the pressure of the so-called Troika. Athens went through deep transformation. The fiscal stance went from a huge deficit to an impressive, cyclically adjusted primary surplus, as we say as economists, the largest in Europe. Government employment was cut, pension costs reduced, wage fell, competitiveness in some sectors like tourism improved. If many of these reforms, which were badly needed, can hardly be contested, numerous observers criticize the speed with which they have been implemented, which strongly impacted economic activity and inflicted considerable pain, social pain, to the Greek people. It is no surprise that while the euro crisis was moving away, the Eurozone is being struck again by another crisis coming from the same country, Greece, but which dimension is not economic, but political in the first place. The turn of events during these last 6 months is astonishing. It was hardly imaginable, except that success of Syriza at the parliamentary polls of January 25 was a logical consequence of the harsh economic and social degradation which had accumulated in this country over the previous years. Furthermore, Syriza had been elected on a platform which comprised two objectives which were hardly compatible. On the one hand, it wanted to turn its back to the so-called austerity. But on the other, it pledged, according to the wishes of the vast majority of the Greek people, to keep the euro and stay in the Eurozone. Beside this contradiction, which was enshrined in its platform, the Tsipras government displayed its weakness by proving to be unprofessional. Each political and diplomatic blunder he made provided new fodder to those who, outside Greece, wanted Greece to leave the euro. By calling a referendum urging the Greek voters to reject the deal with creditors under the argument that this no vote would strengthen his bargaining power, Tsipras overplayed his hand. The referendum did not improve his position at all. Instead, it dramatically weakened it, and with it, the Greek economy. The success forced Tsipras turnover against him. He was obliged to maintain pressure on its creditor with no card in his game. In the meantime, he strengthened the hand of his enemies. In the end, Tsipras, like King Henry IV, who went to Canossa, had to accept a third bailout against sweeping changes, and Greece would keep the euro. And yet, after the referendum episode, Grexit had become the most likely scenario. The Greek people had massively voted no to the austerity imposed by the Troika. The former finance minister, Varoufakis, had secretly prepared a plan B to go back to the drachma, as he recently admitted. On the creditor's side, Wolfgang Schäuble was forcefully pledging for a temporary 5-year exit of Greece from the Eurozone. Many countries, Finland, Slovenia, had publicly declared their hostility to Greece remaining in the euro area. Now, how is it that, in a matter of days, we ended up with a decision to keep Greece in the Eurozone and to mobilize a huge bailout of about 86 billion of euros, which have to be withdrawn from the budget of the member states? Let us look at Greece first. Tsipras, who came to power to overthrow austerity policies, ended up fighting today against his own political pals to implement precisely the type of reforms they together forcefully rejected yesterday. Tsipras has been transforming itself into a social reformist. The split of Syriza, which led yesterday to his resignation, was a necessity. It was the only way for him to restore his credibility. And in order to inspire trust and relaunch the economy, he also has to regain political legitimacy, which he will get only through the polls. Greece badly needs a reform-oriented center-left parliamentary majority which would vote for a platform combining structural reforms with social fairness. This is the best scenario for Greece and for Europe as well. If it works, it would not be the first time that the magic wand of Europe dynamic would have achieved such a transformation. In 1983, while I was a young member of the French Parliament, I witnessed the yet unbelievable tournant de la rigueur, austerity turn, imposed to the radical left majority made of socialists and communists by the participation of France to the exchange rate European Stability Mechanism. For François Mitterrand yesterday, as for Alexis Tsipras today, the choice was between sticking to their ideological phantasm and lead Europe to break down, or accept an economic and social U-turn and be forced to betray their electorate. Now, when it comes to Germany and many other countries of the Eurozone, This U-turn on Grexit is no less impressive than in Greece. The fact that in a matter of days, they have all given up the idea of letting Greece leave the euro, and that despite skepticism, which is still very present, they unanimously accepted to contribute to the bailout, is a testimony that something much stronger than the sheer calculus of national interest came into play. Wolfgang Kauder, the leader in German parliament for the CDU, a party among which there has been so much resilience to give in to Greece, provides the clue to this reversal. In his explanation of votes on the bailout he delivered for his party, after recalling rightly to me that with hindsight, admission of Greece in the Eurozone in 2001 was a decisive mistake, he made this statement, I quote, "One thing is clear, it is not about making Greece an offer, but it is a question of holding this Europe together." And during the same debate, Sigmar Gabriel, the Social Democrat deputy to Mrs. Merkel, conjured the risk of North-South splits and other rifts that, I quote, would have Europe into a much deeper crisis than just a financial one. Jacques Rueff, a famous French economist, made this statement a long time ago. L'Europe se fera par la monnaie ou elle ne se fera pas. Europe will be built through the currency or it won't be built. Listening to this argument, I cannot resist to transform this sentence into l'Europe se défera par la monnaie ou elle ne se défera pas. Europe will be destroyed by the currency or it won't be destroyed. Once again, the lesson to be drawn from this crisis is that the European construction is an irresistible force which has been deeply enshrined in the collective psyche of the Europeans for decades, if not for centuries. It started to be in motion after the Second World War, thanks to the vision of an exceptional and nevertheless modest politician, Robert Schuman, helped in his travels by a man of for whole season, Jean Monnet. The foundation they started to lay down with luminaries such as Konrad Adenauer or Alcide de Gasperi in this country resisted even to the picky nationalism of Charles de Gaulle, who even ended up playing a major part in the edification of the European house. But we should not limit ourselves to the last 60 years. If we listen to German professor Dieter Borschmeier, I quote, in Germany, the spiritual fathers of European unity are named Goethe, Beethoven, Heine, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche. Nietzsche, who in his book Beyond a Good and Evil, dated 1886, was famously appealing to the good Europeans, and for Nietzsche, Goethe was the model of the good European, to repel national excitement and not to return to reason, that is to say, to good Europeanism. And in this meeting for friendship amongst people, I cannot resist as a conclusion to give you a quotation which goes back to 1849. Our great poet Victor Hugo was invited to speak to the Congress of Peace. He then pronounced these magnificent and prescient sentences, which I will read in French, since translation cannot fully grasp the music of words. He said, "Messieurs, vous comptez dans vos rangs des publicistes, des philosophes, des ministres des cultes chrétiens, des écrivains éminents. Plusieurs de ces hommes considérables de ces hommes publics et populaires qui sont les lumières de leur nation, as it is today in Rimini. Je suis de ceux qui disent, avec vous tous, nous qui sommes ici, nous disons à la France, à l'Angleterre, à la Prusse, à l'Autriche, à l'Espagne, à l'Italie, à la Russie, nous leur disons, un jour viendra où les armes tomberont des mains, à vous aussi. Un jour viendra où vous, la France, vous, la Russie, vous, l'Italie, vous, l'Angleterre, vous, l'Allemagne, vous toutes, nations du continent, sans perdre vos qualités distinctes et votre glorieuse individualité, vous vous fondrez étroitement dans une unité supérieure et vous constituerez la fraternité européenne. Un jour viendra et où il n'y aura plus d'autre champ de bataille que les marchés s'ouvrant au commerce et les esprits s'ouvrant aux idées. Un jour viendra où les boulets et les bombes seront remplacés par les votes, par le suffrage universel des peuples, par le vénérable arbitrage d'un grand Sénat souverain qui sera à l'Europe ce que le Parlement est à l'Angleterre, ce que la Diète est à l'Allemagne, ce que l'Assemblée législative est à la France. 1849. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.
Grazie, merci professeur pour.
Thank you very much indeed for your speech. And the euro that was introduced as a tool to foster European Union actually risked to sort of destroyed. So everything depends on the use that is made of something. So if the euro is going to become a main by itself or a goal by itself, so this risks to replace a political vision, as Victor Hugo sort of said in 1849, as we heard. So now the floor goes to Professor Sinn. So is it true, is it possible that euro become or may become again or may be used as a sort of tool to support the union or to destroy the union? So what are the perspectives? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today to this very important gathering, and the topic we're dealing with today is very important, and I would really like to talk in Italian, but unfortunately I don't know enough Italian, so I'll switch to English.
Greece is one of the topics, and it shows that the idea of the euro was really not as successful as had been imagined. Instead of bringing the countries of Europe together, it has created distrust, hassle, and strife among the peoples of Europe more than I, in my lifetime, have ever heard in Western Europe. And this is because Southern Europe, and Greece in particular, has been driven into a deep crisis, not by chance, but because of the euro. The euro reduced the interest rate for the Greek government from 25% to 5%. It was very tempting to borrow, to increase the wages beyond productivity. That increased the price level in Greece and deprived Greece of its competitiveness. It resulted in a mass unemployment of more than 25% and more than 50% youth unemployment. Greece has been cut off
from the capital market since 2008. The capital market has imposed very severe austerity on the country. The other countries of Europe have set up rescue operations through the ECB with the help of the IMF and through new institutions that have been created to mitigate the austerity coming from markets. 344 billion euros is the overall sum of public credit which other countries through these various channels have provided to Greece. Per household, this is 83,000 euros. 83.000 euro per ogni famiglia. This is not austerity imposed by other countries on Greece. It is a huge rescue program, bigger than anything the world has seen thus far. Greece is now too expensive, as I said. The wages are 14, 15 euros. In neighboring Turkey, the wages are 5 euros. In neighboring Bulgaria, Romania, which are EU countries, the wages are 3 euros, 4 euros. There is no way to make Greece competitive inside the euro. We destroy the society by keeping it in. There will be ongoing mass unemployment, and even if money comes from other countries, it will not create jobs, but keep the country in a situation where it is permanently dependent on this flow of money. It's like the Italian Mezzogiorno, the same problem. Like East Germany, the same problem. Like the Dutch disease, when the Dutch found natural gas, sold it to the world, they increased their wages, that destroyed their export industry. There is no way to save Greece but to help them exiting and allowing them to return. This is the only way to generate more jobs and employment. All this money goes to somewhere, but not to the people who need it, not to the unemployed, not to the young people. It goes to rich people who bring it abroad, buy companies in the world, buy real estate in London with it, but it does not arrive with the people. Let me say something fundamental. I deeply believe in the European idea. I believe we have to create the United States of Europe, a confederation of the European countries. And we have models that show us how this can work. We can look at Switzerland, where the cantons have formed a confederation. We can look at the United States of America, where more than 50 countries came together, states came together to form a common state. So it is possible for Europe to do that, and it is necessary. Monsieur Alphandéry cited Victor Hugo. Hugo said he believes in a united Europe without arms being erected against one another. Where is the common army in Europe? I don't see it. We have 28 different armies under separate leadership. This is completely contrary to all the music I hear from Brussels. The real effort would be to unite Europe, create a common government, which has a common foreign policy and commands a common army. If you talk about peace and prosperity, this is the foremost and most important thing to do. And if we look at Switzerland and we look at the United States of America, this is how they started. They did not start with putting all the money together in one pot. They started by uniting their armies. And then the fiscal side followed after this step. We completely reversed the order in Europe by beginning with a common currency, and that was the mistake. America had a very difficult phase. You know that in 1861 there was a war of secession. What had happened? You know about the slavery problem. But you should also know about the debt problem. Alexander Hamilton, the first finance minister, had mutualized the debt of the different states. There was a second round of debt mutualization in 1813, when there was the second war against Britain. So the states thought, well, you can borrow as much as you wish. The debt burden is lifted to the federal level. And they borrowed. They built roads, canals, useful things, but they consumed a lot of money. There was an enormous economic upswing, but it turned out to be a bubble. The bubble burst in 1837. From 1837 to 42, 9 out of 29 American states and territories went bankrupt. And all the others were unable to help because they were handicapped also. Again, nothing but hassle and strife had resulted from this attempt, which failed. Then there was a very difficult phase, and 19 years later, there was the War of Secession. The unresolved debt problem had contributed, next to the slavery problem, to these tensions. And only after the War of Secession did the Americans establish their system. It is a no bailout system. If a state overborrows, it goes bankrupt. And the other states do not bail out the creditors of this state. California recently was close to bankruptcy. The Fed did not buy any Californian government bond, nor did any money come from the federal government. It was the creditors themselves who were facing the risk, and California had to change its behavior. This is the only way a federation can work. The same in Switzerland. If a canton goes bankrupt, it is not bailed out by others or by the central bank. And these two countries, Switzerland and the United States of America, have now lived for centuries with much success. Rather than trying to reinventing the wheel, we should copy exactly their approach. Of course, we need then federal taxes. We need a federal budget. We need redistribution schemes to some extent. But we have to stick to the sequencing, and we have to keep the separate states to some extent autonomous and responsible for their finances. But we are not there. Many governments in Europe dismiss the idea of creating a common state. In particular, the French government. I must say this in open now here. One French president after the other has declared that the final goal of the United States of Europe is not a French goal. And here, I think, is a major problem. You cannot mutualize the debt. You cannot create a transfer union without really creating a true political union with a common state. Let me make a joke. Mrs. Merkel loves Mr. Hollande. It's not true. But Mr. Hollande loves the money of Mrs. Merkel. This is true. They talk about marriage. And the question is, should the money be shared before the marriage or after the marriage? This is the true problem of Europe. It's a sequencing problem. Before we go the political way to a full union, to a true union, I believe we cannot have the euro as it is now. It has to be more flexible. We have a euro where you can just enter and you can never exit. This is like a prison. You can only enter. You're trapped. Why don't we have a more flexible euro? Something where you can exit temporarily, devalue, become competitive, and return thereafter. What is such a problem with such a solution? Rather than keeping the peoples of Greece in hardship for another decade or two, this would be a rather quick way of allowing them a recovery. And then after a few years, they could return. This was Schäuble's idea. To depict this idea as an idea of hostility against Greece is completely absurd. It is really the economic solution. Otherwise, Varoufakis would not have planned the same thing. When he came to power with the agreement of Tsipras, he had planned the exit. He had a secret committee preparing all the details about the exit. And he then, in the evening of the referendum, suggested this plan, and then the next day he had to resign. And I bet you that has to do with some telephone calls between Mr. Hollande and Mr. Tsipras. This was not a decision in favor of the Greek people. Europe is not yet the United States, has not yet formed the state which it should found, and therefore the euro cannot quite be exactly the same thing as the dollar. We need some system between a mere currency union with fixed exchange rates and the dollar. And this could be the euro, but more flexible. You can enter, you can exit. It's not such a disaster. You have rules how this could happen, rather than trying the impossible and cutting the Greek wages by 50% or something, which would be necessary through reforms to make the country competitive. Who can really make such a proposal? It is not a true solution. And we cannot also solve all the problems with money, because it's simply too much money. West Germany finances East Germany every year. The convergence between East and West Germany has stopped 20 years ago. There's no convergence at all. But East Germany is 20% of the total. If we begin to solve all problems in Europe in the Greek way, then 50% of the Euro population would have to finance the other 50%. So it is not a possibility. We need a Europe where everyone can develop his own skills, his own abilities, in freedom so that he has a job, he can nourish his family, and then there will be prosperity and peace in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Quando si dice si incontra
when we start by saying an Englishman, a German, and an Italian meet, this sounds like the beginning of a joke. There are diversities, but in spite of, or maybe thanks to these diversities, there are some common elements. The solution is to be found in a deeper integration, but we need to understand the causes of the problems we are trying to solve. And this is what Domenico Lombardi is going to talk about. I'd like to thank you all for this invitation. I travel quite a lot for business. I take part in many congresses, but the experience of participating in the Rimini meeting is really unique. What I'd like to do with my intervention is to provide you with a different perspective from what Professors Alphandéry and Sinn said. From the Italian point of view, from the point of view of the Italian economy, which is different from many other countries in the Eurozone hit by the economic crisis. First of all, the crisis hit the Italian economy very seriously in 2007. You can see that there is a gap that becomes wider and today, we have recent Eurostat data on the growth of GDP in Eurozone, where we have a lower level in Italy, even though we have a plus. This is encouraging, but the gap is still there. So we needed to ask ourselves why there is this difference in the dynamics of growth in the Eurozone. And this is quite alarming because if we take a look at the growth rate of the GDP this year, which will be quite encouraging, just above 0.5%. If Italy goes on at this pace, we will have to wait until 2033 before we go back to the same GDP level we had before the crisis. And this obviously has repercussions in terms of welfare, employment, perspectives for young people and so on. So what is important is to understand the origins, the cause of this crisis. This will enable us to outline the right policies. At the beginning of the crisis, we talked about fiscal austerity. We had the impression that Italy had implemented lax fiscal policies for many years. What I'm trying to explain here is that this is not true. The origins of the crisis in Italy are quite unique and they are mainly different from those of other Eurozone economies hit by the crisis like Spain, Portugal and Greece and Ireland as well. So Italy, first of all, if compared with other Eurozone countries, has always had a certain budget gap, and this just to show that fiscal policies in Italy in the last decades were not responsible for the crisis. We made some simulations and we saw that if Italy had kept this primary advance at the same level as the other countries of the Eurozone, we would have a deficit that would be over 200%. And this is caused by the primary surplus that Italy registered over recent years. On the other hand, if the growth rate in Italy would have been at the same level as the other Eurozone countries, its deficit would be quite smaller than the one we have today. And it would be even below 20%, that is to say, about 100% instead of today's 130%. So, well, this graph shows what is the nature of the problem. This is not a problem due to fiscal policies as such, but rather due to a lack of growth, that is to say, a structural problem that obviously has repercussions on also on the fiscal side with a different ratio between deficit and GDP. Another important aspect that I would like to prove wrong is that the pro capita public expenses, if compared with the Eurozone average you see in black on the graph, you can see that Italy is always below the European average in terms of fiscal expenses and public expenses pro capita, with the exception of public services. So once again, this is one of the repercussions of public debt, but it is not a structural component of this debt. Another conventional truth that was formulated to explain the crisis in the Eurozone, and it actually is true for some countries, but not for Italy, is that some countries were granted access at low interest rates with low-cost financing, which led to the bubble that hit so many economic sectors, making economies more vulnerable. This is true for Spain, for Ireland, for Greece and Portugal, but it is not true for Italy. Here we see that the debt, the non-financial debt, has always been below the Eurozone average. If we take a look at the foreign payment balance, we have in the second column a very low level of imbalance, and this balance has never been volatile. It has always been quite stable if compared to other Eurozone countries. Look at Spain in 2007 at the beginning of the crisis. We had 10%, whilst Italy only 1% at the time. So this shows once more how the origins of the crisis are different in Italy than in other Eurozone countries. They are not linked to low-cost financing from the Eurozone or fiscal policies that could be too flexible. These origins have to be looked for in other areas. First of all, Italian economy has a low productivity problem. Productivity is one of the lowest of the Eurozone Italian productivity. Then we have low levels of education, the number of graduated and also the kind of graduation they get. Then the costs of bureaucracy and well, Italy is not actually very attractive from the investing point of view. So if we take into account a conventional measure or criteria to measure competitiveness, that is to say unitary labor costs, we see in the graph that for a certain period there has been a convergence towards the dynamic of Germany, which is the green line. The only country that in a way can be defined an outlier is Italy, the red line, where this standard competitiveness measure singles out Italy in this adjustment process. There are two ways to summarize, this concept. There are two ways to improve competitiveness. Increase productivity, obviously. This is, the best possible option. As you see in the second column, Italy is the country that had the lowest productivity growth level, a negative value. And if we take into account the OECD's forecasts for the next 5 years, Italy still has the lowest productivity level. If the productivity level is so low, in order to restore competitiveness, we have to work on wages. And this obviously will then, by reducing wages, we have obviously a decrease in demand. And that's exactly what happened in Greece. And we do not want to see the same in Italy. And if we take into account, for instance, the expenses for research and development, well, this is in line with what I was saying before. Italy is one of the countries of the Eurozone that has the lowest level of expenses for research and development. If we take into account another criterion, the number of people employed in the research and development sector, you see that the percentage is very low, and this is perfectly in line with what I was saying. Italy is lagging behind all other European countries in this sector. If we take into account the number of graduates in Italy, again, Italy lags behind other European countries. And if we compare these figures with the data concerning the number of students for scientific and economic universities, we are about 7%, whereas, for instance, in Germany, the percentage is 16%. So these are, I think, the aspects that we would need to tackle in order to improve the potential growth of a European economy and to take it to a sustainable level that would enable us to sustain our public debt, which is increasing because growth is not enough. So these are the results of a survey of the World Bank on 189 countries. And here you see Italy is the red dot, and the average of the Eurozone is the black dot. So, well, you see that here when we try to measure the attractiveness of a country, it is always below, and sometimes really farther below, the Eurozone average. If we take an example that of, for instance, the contracting capacities, we see that there are countries like Iraq and Madagascar that range at a higher level than Italy. So, well, and I conclude, Bernhard. So that's what I wanted to, that's my point. The crisis is a common crisis because of its consequences, but it is also a crisis that has different origins in the different countries. We cannot forget this. It is important to understand the different origins of the crisis in the different economies so that we can have an ad hoc solution for each country that has to be something that goes beyond the debate on fiscal policies and concentrates on long-term solutions that will enable economies like Italy to go back to a sustainable level. So, as you saw, the origins of the Italian crisis date back further back than the crisis. So, well, that's it for the moment from my part, and obviously I'm at your disposal if there are any questions.
Grazie Domenico Lombardi.
Thank you. Thanks to Domenico Lombardi. And I do think this is quite an interesting example. The primary surplus of Italy is, in a certain way, better than that of other European countries. We cannot have a look that puts all the European countries together. If Italy shouldn't have to pay all the interests it has to pay, the situation would be much better. Then we have all the problems of competitiveness and productivity that we have heard about. But we also have a very strong potential. We need to have more confidence in what we can do. Now, I'd like, since we have this common idea that the future of Europe depends on higher integration from the political point of view, I would like to ask the same question to our three speakers, that is to say, the problem of Europe is diversity. So that's just like Professor Lombardi was saying, differences from the fiscal system point of view, pension system, welfare. So this diversity makes it very difficult for a single currency to succeed. So do you think that there is a real possibility to have a political governance that could enable this kind of integration, that would make a single currency an opportunity and not a problem? So this is actually my question for you, and then obviously you can also make comments on what your colleagues say. I would just like to ask you to be quite brief because, well, I know this is not easy because there are so many other things you would like to say. But, well, let's try to practice austerity in this as well.
I'm sorry, I don't speak Italian. It's a pity. I am very glad to participate to this exchange of views. Because as you saw, there are some points, very important points, on which, even though we are both pro-European, we disagree with Professor Sinn. First, I would say that I fully agree with the presentation of Domenico, which explained that the Italian issues are structural, and they come from a lack of competitiveness, which is the result of a lack of action to fight over the last decades this lack of competitiveness of the Italian economy. And what is very interesting in his conclusion is that he did not pledge for an exit of Italy from the euro, because there could be a thesis, like in Greece, which is that leaving the euro would allow the Italian government to depreciate the lira and then regain competitiveness through monetary devaluation. I know that it is a temptation. I really think that it is a very big mistake. Why? Because when you have a devaluation, and we had a lot in France, unfortunately in the past, we know the results. Inflation follows suit very quickly, and you lose the competitiveness you gained in a matter of months, except if you do the structural reforms that are necessary to regain competitiveness. So it's much better to make these structural reforms inside the Eurozone than outside. About Professor Sinn, I would say that I agree with him on many points. I agree with him that we need to build a confederation of states in Europe. And the most important is to build a European community of defense. That is probably the most important goal when you see what's happening in Ukraine, when you see what's happening in Africa, when you see what's happening in the Middle East. And I agree that it would give a big impetus to a federal budget. It would give a goal to put together receipts in order to fund the European defense we need. I slightly disagree to a few other points. First, about France. I should say that many people in France are not ready to go towards what you should call the United States of Europe. That's a fact. Even though, as Jacques Delors said and called for, a federation of nations, states, was probably the goal to attain. There are many more people than we think, than you think, in France, who would be ready to go forward in this direction. The problem is not that easy, and time is not to look at the other country and say that they are the culprits. For example, in the matter of defense, we would much appreciate to have Germany help in the huge effort we are making in Africa, in Mali, in Central Africa, and in some places else where we are alone, and where we spend a lot of money and people. Now, I come to Greece. Should Greece be better if it left the euro? This is the main argument of Professor Sinn, which I must say is shared by a lot of economists, and very famous economists. He wrote recently a paper in the New York Times recalling that, speaking of Paul Krugman and Joe Stiglitz, even though he doesn't share, I don't share either the ideas of these economists. I have two very strong arguments against this, this position. The first one is for Greece, and the second one is for Europe. For Greece, it goes back to what I said for Italy. If Greece left the euro, it would not solve its structural problems at all. It would have to solve the same problems with the drachma as with the euro. Competitiveness, too much red tape, and all the issues which are on the table. And then it would end up very, very quickly into inflation and the unavailability of the Greeks to tap the international markets, and probably they will lose all the possibility of having capital flows coming from the outside. Now, the other problem is Europe. It was a mistake to have Greece enter in the Eurozone in 2001. I agree with that. It was a mistake. We made this mistake. All the European countries made this mistake, and we have to pay for it. When you make a mistake, you pay for it. If now we decided, which is very improbable after what happened in the last days, to leave Greece, get out of the euro, the consequences would be much, much more important for Europe than the destiny of Greece itself. Because it would be, Europe would go back. It would be, I should say, very much something which would have a terrible impact on the construction of Europe. People would say that the construction of Europe is something that is failing. And then we have the euro, we have to keep it as it is. It is one step of the European construction. A very important step, complicated one. And we saw it through the crisis we went through. But we have to admit that the euro is there, and we have to use it as the best as we can, and try to solve the issues that come from the euro. I'm sure that the euro will help to go further in the European construction. Everything we have done since the origin of the crisis, the euro crisis, went in the right direction. We have to go a lot further. It is just the beginning. But I am sure that with the help of all the European people that are much pro-European than many people believe, and you see it through the polls, even in Germany, it's unbelievable to see in Germany the real support of the politicians and of the German people of the bailout for Greece. And I'm sure that with the support of the European people, we'll go forward and we'll build little by little the federation of Europe that we need.
Grazie. Merci.
If I may, yes, thank you. Let me say first, this exit debate is not about Italy. Italy is a very competitive country. It has one of the most productive industries of Europe in the north. Italy can solve its problems all inside the euro. Concerning Greece, it's a completely different situation. Because this country is inherently uncompetitive and unproductive for many reasons. It would, of course, be good to have a miracle and increase the productivity in Greece. But miracles are rare in the real world. Would, as you think, a devaluation lead to an immediate inflation to nullify the effect? No, it wouldn't, because the price level and the wage level in Greece has artificially been increased above the natural level through the credit from other countries. 10 years of borrowing enormously, you spoke about the current account deficits, have shifted them to an unsustainable level. And if we ask people to correct for that inside the euro through labor market reforms, which basically means wage cuts, it will be very hard for the people. Think of a normal household who has borrowed for his house, or think of another one who is a tenant and has a rental contract which he has to pay. You cannot cut the wages in order to make him competitive. He can't pay for the rent, he can't pay for the credit, he goes bankrupt. If, however, you move to the drachma, then everything will be converted to drachma. His debt is a drachma debt. His rental contract is a drachma contract. And if the drachma devalues, it's not so important for his wage. He still can pay for his credit. He still can pay for his rent. Everything becomes cheaper without really noticing, except for the import goods. And so that's the desired effect. Imports become more expensive in drachma. People can't afford it. They substitute away from imports buying domestic goods. And that gives the domestic economy a boom, a boost. Because the farmers, the textile industry, they would face more demand, they would create more jobs, and the unemployment rate would go down. This would be effect number one. Effect number two would be that if Greece devalues, the tourists would return from Turkey to Greece. There would be another boom. And the third effect is capital flows. There was a huge capital flight of about 200 billion from Greece. 100 billion rich Greek people who brought the money abroad, 100 billion of foreign investors who were withdrawing their money. But if, say, the drachma now devalues by 50%, what would happen? The capital would return immediately because everything is so cheap. People would buy real estate in Greece and they would renovate the real estate. There would be a construction boom resulting out of it. We in the IFO Institute have done an empirical study of 71 countries which went into crisis after the war and devalued. In the vast majority of these countries, was there a recovery of the economy after 1 or 2 years? It's a very strong and very quick effect. If you try to do that inside the euro, you destroy the society. John Maynard Keynes has declared the same already to Churchill in the 20s. When Churchill wanted to go to the gold standard, he said, "You cannot do that, because then we are too expensive. We have to cut our wages." But the unions will object. This will result in mass unemployment. Churchill nevertheless wanted to go to the gold standard. But fortunately for Britain, in 1931, it was able to exit the gold standard, and that was the recipe for recovery. They devalued. My own country, Germany, was in a similar situation, but it could not devalue because the Dawes Plan stipulated that the reparation payments to the victors of the First World War had to be made in Reichsmark fixed to the gold standard. Germany was in a prison in this gold standard. So it had to reduce its wages and prices. From 1929 to 33, the German price level declined by 22% and the wages by 28%. And that was the recipe for bringing this country to the brink of a civil war. And what happened in 1933 was worse than a civil war. That is exactly the problem. You cannot possibly mimic a real devaluation or an open devaluation through a real internal devaluation by cutting your wages and prices. This is not a possibility. And this is why Yanis Varoufakis had prepared the exit. He's not stupid, he is a good economist. And if we keep Greece in the euro, it has completely different motives. The motive is there are investors from other countries who still have their claims. There are other countries which have given credit. They don't want to show the write-offs. So they want to preserve everything. They want to preserve the idea that everything is in order and there is not a problem. They are kicking the can down the road, but it is not a solution for the people of Greece. And let me say a final word to the army problem. I'm glad that we share the view that we need to do something together, but it can't be that other countries pay for the French activities in Africa. We need a common army with a common command organized by all European countries.
Penso la chiarezza manca da nessuna parte. A Lombardi la parola.
Well, I'd say that was pretty clear. Professor Lombardi, well, I would structure my answer in 3 points. First of all, we need a coherent model. And I go back to what Professor Sinn said before, the no bailout clause. And the fact that in the United States, for instance, the different states cannot be helped by the federal government. Well, as an Italian living abroad, I can say that there is a strong ambiguity. And that's what I want to make clear. For instance, when Greece issued its first program in 2010, it was already clear by then that the Greek debt was unsustainable. Well, that was not certain, but it was quite obvious at the moment, so it was quite clear that Greece would not be able to pay for its debt. So there was a restructuring of the debt later on, later than it should have happened, and all the proposals and the ideas to include in the European institutions a mechanism for the reconstruction of the debt, according to which if you do not have access to public finances, you can have this no bailout clause. Well, this should be accompanied by an institution that can enable the countries to restructure their own debt. There are different proposals, different possibilities. With Paolo Savona, we published an article on this on the financial newspaper Il Sole 24 Ore. But when we talk about this kind of institutional mechanism, well, everyone is quite cautious. Also, those countries who are in favor of budgetary discipline. And other concrete examples, in New York, at the United Nations, they are discussing international global mechanisms that goes beyond the Eurozone for those countries that experience a crisis and cannot pay for their debt. Instead of decreasing wages and pensions, there are other mechanisms that can be used to decrease debt. There are some Northern American countries voted against this, and some European countries voted against this. There were over 100 countries that voted in favor of this mechanism that should be a fair mechanism to deal with the sovereign crisis. But some countries, like Japan, and some European countries, and some Northern European countries voted against. So I think that here the problem is the following. We need to find a coherent institutional model. We all believe that Eurozone countries need to, try and find a solution to their debts on their own, but we also need to have some institutional mechanisms to make this happen. Another important aspect is that the cost of the Greek crisis is enormous for Eurozone in terms of not only financial elements. And here I go back to the message I wanted to give during my presentation. We always talk about what is going to happen next month. There will be elections in Greece, Tsipras has resigned, and so on and so forth. But this makes us overlook important policies that can create prosperity and employment on the long term. So how can we create a functioning service single market, for instance? All these aspects are always put aside when we are faced with a new episode of the Greek saga. So, and this is my last point. That's on the future of Eurozone. The Eurozone is now no federation, no confederation. So the only thing is, the only fundamental aspect is growth. If there will be no growth, then the credibility of this project will not survive. We know that there has been a loss by 25% in economics terms in Greece since Greece has become part of the Eurozone. So if this trend goes on, it won't be a discussion among ourselves to say whether there has to be a Grexit or not. It will be Greece that will decide autonomously to exit the Eurozone. Thank you. So I believe that experts and scientists at international level have different perspectives on this problem. Makes it easy to understand that things are not as simple as they may appear. So stereotypes, ideological conviction do not help. We need to have people taking political decisions that are based on long reflections, and whatever we decide to do, there will be a long way to go before we actually find a new sphere of stability. We need to understand that there is more than some mottos and ideologies and we need to be ready to read and learn and listen to those who know about finances and economics. So thank you all for doing this morning. And I believe that, well, your participation shows that there is interest and there is a will to sustain the construction of Europe. So this is exactly what we need to do. Read more and listen more to what is said. Let's go beyond Twitter and other social networks that cannot go deep into these important matters. I'd like to thank our speakers, our panelists. This debate will certainly go on, and now you have more information to make your choices. Thank you.